Family Wealth with Esther, the podcast that delves into the intricate dance between family, business, and wealth. We're here to unpack the conversations many of us are avoiding, but that are crucial to building lasting legacies. And today we're tackling a topic that touches every single one of us: retirement and the continuity of our family enterprises. After a lifetime of hard work navigating our unique and often challenging African economic landscape and supporting our extended families, what does retirement look like for us as Africans? Is it the secure, dignified reward you've earned, or a period of uncertainty? Consider this. What if I told you that across our continent, a startlingly small number, perhaps fewer than 1 in 10 people, are ready and on track to retire comfortably? That's a tough reality. As Africans, we're dreaming of building legacies, not leaving financial burdens. So why do we often struggle to plan for a future that is inevitable? How do we ensure that our golden years are actually golden, not just for us, but generations to follow? And today we're not shying away from these critical questions, and we're diving deep into why we stumble in retirement planning, what the numbers really say for us in Africa, and how this impacts the continuity of family wealth. To help us explore these critical questions, I'm thrilled to welcome Sebastian Zuze to the studio. Sebastian is a renowned retirement specialist and the CEO of Chiedza Retirement Advisory Services. He has dedicated his career to helping individuals and organizations navigate the complexities of wealth management and retirement readiness. Sebastian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Esther. It's a pleasure to be here, and also just acknowledging the work that you are doing. And I've been impressed, and especially, looking at we rarely talk about some of these difficult topics you address in your podcast about family issues. So I'm excited to be here.
And I'm also very excited. So just a background for our listeners and our viewers. The day Sebastian and I met, we went on a 2-hour rabbit hole.
Exactly.
Really enjoyed the conversation. And this is actually one of the episodes that I'm genuinely looking forward to unpacking. There's the story, retirement, right? And I think this touches at the core of a lot of work for advisors as well. How do we get founders to transition? How do we get next gen to come into it? And I think even in the broader context for Africa, leadership, we're always looking at succession, even in churches, whether in government, in politics. We seem to have a struggle around retirement, continuity, and succession. And so this is going to be a really interesting and exciting episode. So let's get into it. I've heard the story. So please tell our listeners and our viewers how you got into becoming a retirement specialist.
Yeah. So Esther, it's, when you say retirement specialist or expert, like many people say, I was speaking at the CEO Roundtable, the inaugural Public Service Commission conference last year in December. And I looked at the flyer. It said a speech by a retirement expert. And I began to say, what are they talking about? How did I end up, being a retirement expert? And it's a story that happens to a lot of other people, but it's amazing what happens when you respond to challenges or crises that we face in life. Mm-hmm. The year is 2008. Mm-hmm. And I need to, before I even tell you that story that transformed my life, I am a scientist. I majored in chemical engineering. I'm not, I'm the last person to be talking about retirement. Mm-hmm. And also just qualifying that myself, I'm a retiree. Mm-hmm. I retired at 45. Okay. I'm now 52, so I have 8 years. Is it retirement experience. And some people say, in Shona, like 8 years experience, zero or But I didn't retire. I also hasten to add that I didn't retire because a job is bad. A job is a blessing. Do your job very well, but there's some that transformed me. So the year is 2008. That time I was a young manager at one of the major food companies in Zimbabwe, here in Harare. So my father was working for also one of the big employers here in Harare. So July 2008, my father goes to work. It was on a Friday. I have left home. I've started also my family. So everything is fine at the family, Friday, we get home, we are talking. I come to see my parents, drop them a few things. On Monday, my father goes to work. At the gate, they're being told, everyone who is 55 years and above, you are no longer, allowed even to come in. And this is a shock, my father has got, and they've got friends and other, even bosses. I might not be at this point at liberty to mention one of the bosses who had a stroke. Because unlike my father, this boss, because he's driving a big vehicle, he just drove in, only to be told, look, there's even a key blocker. You cannot get into your office. My father comes home to my mother. He did I later learned about 4 or 5 days. Like he would leave home, like he's going to work. My mother would give him a luncheon. Then he goes, there's a popular place here in town where, he would sit there. And then it's around 4, 5, he comes home. So my workplace was near my father's. So my father used to come, like as just to show my son is the manager here and things like that, like all parents do. So workers started telling me, your father, we're seeing him at this place. Is there something wrong, boss? And at first I refused because, I'm doing very well in my life. Like many people as managers or having some offices, we don't want to address that. Sometimes we go through challenges. So I say, no, my father is at work. But the third day, I said, look, let me go and check. And I go there. I never forget. I'm talking about what transformed me and what informed the course that I teach now on retirement. So I get there, I see my father is sitting. He put like 3 bricks sitting there. He's got his lunch box and, he has got his work suit. So I said to him, we started talking. I said, no, I'm checking. Maybe there are workers from this company that I was working for. Maybe they might be loitering around. So so he says to me, even myself, I'm tired. So I'm taking rest. Then I'll proceed to work. So we start talking and say, no, if you're not busy at work, you know what? Why don't we go for lunch? I can always phone your manager, maybe make up a story. So he agrees. We go. It was about lunchtime. Can you imagine? We met around 10. Around lunchtime, that's when he said to me, you know what, my son, as I speak to you, we were told to, we just been taken off employment. And I'm like, so what's the problem? You just tell my mother you can be at home. Your wife, stay at home. You have your house. What he told me has informed my approach now. He says, if I tell your mother, Pamba Pagarike, if I tell your mother that we've been strong with Pamba Pagarik, to cut a long story short, we tried. There are 7 of us. We are 5 boys, 2 girls. We started talking to the mother. No, the father should be home now because my father felt humiliated. He didn't want, we're talking retirement. It's trauma, it's challenges. My father felt humiliated. He didn't want to say we have been forced into retirement. He wanted to, let go, have the wife give him ticket because we're talking family, there is an effect we'll get into where people you can the respect they used to give you. So my father wanted to do like I'm the one who said, I don't want anymore. So we make up a story. My mother says, no, your father, if he's not feeling well, he must go to work because we said the father is not well. He must go to work. So we eventually used my sekuru, and that's my boss to come and to tell the sister, no, make sure my mkwasha stays at home. So that was July 2008. October 2008, my father passed on. The guy could wake up, and I didn't understand. Remember, I'm a young guy, I'm doing very well, I've got a big company car. So I didn't put a lot what was going on. You would wake up, and there's a lemon tree at my parents' house. You just sit there. That's when I saw that retirement also is not just about having lots of money. Because we said to him, we'll give you everything. But, you would wake up, it's nothing to do, his day, how he spends his day. So when my father passed on, I the reflections, and I said, look, I nearly wanted to take the employer to court because people could say this is why it was caused by the employer. I put people, a doctor, a lawyer, we're going to, take this up. But then I stopped and said, I want to do something. I want to dedicate my life to teaching employers, families, and the employees about what really is retirement. What really is retirement? So I dedicated this how, and as a result, I've been reaching out to companies, to families to say, what really is retirement? how should you prepare for retirement based on experiences. Started interviewing people, visiting people who have retired, gathering information. And even this podcast we are doing, we're hoping we can, get people to start this discussion because we never talk about it. So that's how now, seeing what I'm doing, I have more people now,
I love that story, and it resonates so much with me. So my dad also went into retirement, and what you're saying makes so much sense, that retirement is not necessarily about money, but I think it goes deeper into sort of sense of purpose, something that you're doing every single day, and you're reorienting your mind to say, okay, now, what am and so I think my next question would be, like, in your experience, and I think it marries on to what you're saying, what are the primary psychological barriers you see preventing people from engaging early with retirement planning?
You see, so I think we need to address the issue about language. If you look, what things become is a function of what you call them. You see, even this comes to our names. You see, if you look at the names that we are given, they have a sort of a aspiration that our parents are saying, I want to Munashe, Tinashe, there's something. So even what we call retirement in our language, look, we call retirement mujikantikere, in Tevele umhlala. So we kind of get like, this is when I have done everything and I am, I'm just relaxed. And it gives you a kind of thinking of age when I'm old or when I reach a certain age. That's why you find a lot of people are like, when I reach 65, 70, now I'm old. And that sort of does damage to old people or old employees. They kind of think, when I'm old, I'll start thinking about retirement. Yeah. And the young people think, look, I'm still young. The average, I was talking to the guys in the studio, he just here to say, probably they've never thought about retirement because they're like, I'm still young. I meet people, I'm still young. Yeah. And then you compound that with the fact that in our education system, we don't have teaching on retirement. Yeah. Isn't it amazing? Retirement will happen to every family, every employer, every even business owner, but we don't teach about it. Yeah. I don't remember ever in my at home, the family. I don't remember one day my father and mother just sitting us down and say, we are going to talk about your father's retirement. Yeah. You see, so that then puts barriers. Our culture itself, we have sort of made retiring a bad subject, like you are useless, you are now spent, you're supposed to just go out there. So that does damage both to the young and the old. So just explaining some of, the problems people go through.
Just following on what you're saying, I think that sometimes maybe in some contexts you almost come with the monarchy system, right? That we want to pass on batons when someone is dead, and so and I think that sort of idea of sort of a monarch thinking, even if we just break it down to a cultural level of being a father, kuti ndichiri baba, right? The head of the home. Ubaba only will come in when the other father is dead. Something like that. So sometimes that there's no smooth transition. So you're now training the next generation into leadership roles. You're like a monarch. And I think it spills over even to sort of our leadership and political system across the continent.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not just a Zimbabwean thing, but I think it's a common theme across with its church. It's sort of like leadership is only transition when someone is dead. There's no transitioning of any sort, and therefore we're not talking about retirement because dinda could be something like
and
that.
Esther, you raise a very good point, because you see, retirement is not played out at the end, because there's the issue of preparation. You see, so most of the time the mistake we make as organizations, as leaders, as even soccer players, musicians, because retirement will happen to everyone. When you leave it to like at the end, what tends to happen is you then don't get yourself prepared and your stakeholders prepared. Because you see, there is a lot of preparation. The key word here is preparation. The people around you have to prepare. and yourself, you have to prepare. I want to share with you some of, because we've made it mostly like a financial issue. I want to share with you some of the losses that happen when someone retires, which will happen to everyone: soccer players, musicians, politicians, directors, general workers, which shows the need to prepare early, because this is actually can be damaging. So I could take you through the 5 things that happen. And as I share this with our audience, with everyone, you need to make a plan now how you will deal with these losses that happen in retirement. Actually, what damages, what is more fatal in retirement is not lack of money. It is actually these losses. Because when they happen, they don't happen in like sequentially. They can come at one time. So, when we are employed, we have a structured day. Our day is formatted around our employment. We come to work 8 o'clock, we stop. 10 o'clock, we start at 8. 10 o'clock, we stop, we have tea and all that. That creates habits in us. Even our bodies, the time you wake up, the time you feel hungry to have tea, it's a function of how your day is structured, but structured around your employment. When you retire, you no longer have a structured day. And you feel lost. You wake up, you're like, what should I be doing today? I have retirees whose partners even complain that he no longer wakes up, from the bed. He no longer wakes up because he's like, what will I be doing? So that's a major loss that you need to prepare. Like you said, let's not have a situation where we sort of don't prepare, because you need to prepare and the other guys need to prepare. Like if you look at a family setup, most of the time, the parents, say the father or the mother, are working, so they have a structured day around their employment. And we don't have, as the children, we need also now to accommodate them as they retire. We need to now have a common structured day. So, very important. The other aspect is the loss of purpose. You see, the word purpose means reason for existence. So, when I'm employed, I have a purpose. I'm a manager, I'm a director. Like myself, I was a director. I had purpose. I'm chairing a meeting, I'm giving orders, I'm talking to the press. Now, what happens when I'm no longer employed? You see, I feel lost. I feel like, so I have no reason. Actually, in men, it can lead to suicidal thoughts because you feel like I've lost. I'm no longer relevant. Relevance. And the other
big word, relevance. I think that's such an important. That's important,
Sure. And now you also have a loss of identity. It's amazing how much our jobs, especially for those who have top range jobs or influential jobs, whether they be politicians, ministers, people like that. You identified and you get privileges of your identity. You see, when I was director, I could go into a shop and perhaps people are being asked for IDs and you don't know, this is Mr. Zuze. And immediately I can pass, I can do it. When now people say to me, who are you? And I'm like, you don't know me. And causes. So the loss of identity. There's the other loss, which is the loss of power. Power meaning influence. And also power meaning whether they be politicians. When a politician have power, we see it. When you're a soccer player, you have power. A manager, you have power. Even a low level worker has power at their level. That goes. And also the last loss is the loss of relationships. You see, human beings, we want to have relationships. In fact, as we age, we want to have one of the indicators of success in retirement is having authentic, genuine relationships. People who really care for you, who can just phone you and say, I'm just checking on you. When I do my work, I'm surprised at how many people will say, you phone them and they're like, thank you for the call. And I used to say, why are you thanking me? It means a lot, particularly when you have left employment and you can still have people who can phone you. So these losses, you need to prepare. So we don't have to let it at the last point. Then we suddenly get someone taking a role that they've not been prepared for. So proper preparation prevents poor performance. Let's prepare the earlier, the better for retirement.
Thank you so much. I think you've unpacked so many soft things that happen during retirement, loss of identity, loss of purpose, loss of power, loss of control, loss of relationships. You've worked for 20 years with people and you're reconstructing, reorienting your mind and your day. So many powerful insights. We'll be back on Family Wealth with Esther, and we're going to be going a little bit deeper into our cultural context as Africans, talking more about retirement and legacy planning with Sebastian Zuze. We're back on Family Wealth with Esther, and we're talking about retirement planning for tomorrow, legacy planning with Sebastian Zuze. So I was doing a bit of research around retirement, and I think in my experience from an advisory perspective and getting calls from people in family businesses, one of the biggest challenges that most next gens have with their parents or the founders is this sort of retirement thing, when you're trying to push someone into it and they're struggling to sort of say, well, I think dad or mom needs to sit down and allow us to take over, whether it's the family, whether it's the business, and so on and so forth. And I think in the first segment, what you touched on really are some of the things that we actually highlight, that it's not so much about the power. It's the saying, well, I wake up every day, I've been going to the farm, I've been growing this tobacco, or I built this business, I've been seeing my clients, I go to golf with my, it's not saying, oh, if you guys take over, it's not necessarily about money, but what are they going to do? So I think, the first segment, that was really amazing. And I just want to touch on, the statistics. I didn't realize how bad our statistics are across the continent around retirement and sort of planning. Says 9%, only 9% of the sub-Saharan African labor force is covered by pension funds, right? And we have low retirement affordability across the continent. South Africa, only 6% of South Africans can afford to retire comfortably. And I mean, these figures are actually startling, right? Because it represents all families, right? It represents wealthy families. It represents families of sort of low to middle income. And this really highlights to me how important your work is and how critical it is to discuss the retirement matter. What's been your experience around how ready we are for retirement and what the statistics are across,
You mentioned very factual but frightening stats. Yes. The classes that we run on retirement planning in Zimbabwe, I would put 1 in 10 are ready for retirement. 1 in ready. And if you look at the impact on families, on employees, on organizations, it's, you then begin to reflect to say we need to respond. But perhaps let me explain what could be the root of why we are not prepared. Because I'm a retiree myself, so I've managed, I've gone through all the trauma until I found a way. So we then need to think about what is retirement. There's a definition we have of what retirement is, because how we prepare, even culturally in our context as families, there's an understanding of what retirement is. And of course, we've mentioned that we rarely talk about retirement. But if you look at retirement, it is like even the definition in the dictionary today, it says the time that you are supposed to live active age, service, occupation because of age, to go home and wait until God calls you home. If you look at the current thinking around retirement, it is when you are, I didn't want to use the word useless, when you are spent and then you are supposed to go home. Yeah. And then you wait. That's why we talk of Mujigandi Gere. That's why we talk about just relaxing and perhaps thinking people, I'm now spent. I cannot do anything anymore. And I have come up with a definition that can help us prepare for retirement, because I wanted us to talk about that, then go into some of the issues around it. When you look at a good definition, I call it redefining retirement. So retirement is a separation between an employer and an employee. So retirement is a separation between an employer and an employee. It's also a separation between a business owner a business owner, a family business owner, and their business. I want to sort of repeat that. Even when you have got your business, you retire from your business, because retirement in its proper context, it is a separation between an employee and an employer, a business owner and their business. So even vendors, even small to medium enterprises, because we want to clarify this, because a lot of people think kana ndichizvishandira and need to talk about retirement. You also retire from your because it's a separation. Why I mention separation? We need to understand that there is a separation. We grew up, I always give people an example. We grew up, in our mother's womb. In 9 months, we separated.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that we separate with our employment, with our business, with our families. Creating family wealth means you need to understand that at some stage you separate with your family. And we don't separate because we don't want or it's bad. We separate. It's inevitable. It's a principle. Actually, Esther, you mentioned it's a principle. You see, if you want to be effective as a leader, you need not fight principles. A principle is a self-evident truth. In other words, I grew up in the ghetto. I grew up in St. Mary's in the ghetto. I love the place. Every time I go, I see my friends there. We say it as it is. In the ghetto, we say a principle is the truth whether you like it or not. Whether you like it or not, it is the truth. So as much as a company can they want you, you are the best employee, you separate. If you're a manager, you separate. If you're a politician, you separate. So we need to understand that separation is a principle. If whether we want, whether we don't want. And if we want to be successful, let's stop fighting principles. So we'll separate. So retirement is a separation. Once we understand retirement as a separation, it then helps us to understand under what conditions do we separate. Do we separate? I'm explaining the frightening stats, because people are not preparing, because their basis for preparation is based perhaps on one understanding of retirement. So when we say, how will we separate? We will separate. How do we separate? So number one is mandatory retirement age. So when you reach a certain age, now the age even here in many countries has been moved to 70. They moved the retirement age to 70. The Netherlands, for instance, are moving to 60 to 70. South Africa is reforming its retirement age also from 60 to 65. And perhaps I'll share with you some of the complexities involved in that. But that form of separation, people need to understand that you separate, and it's called mandatory. So, in other words, we are forcing people. We're talking preparation for retirement. The word mandatory means force. So, we are actually saying we will force you out when you reach 70 years. And obviously, that is not a good way of separating with employees, with our leaders, with our soccer players, with our musicians, because we're forcing at a certain age. And obviously, when you talk about retiring due to age, then you have to talk about another critical player in retirement. Who is that player? People forget about that player. Who is that player? It's God. The moment I say I can extend my age, I need then to say, whoever your higher power is, I know we have various listeners, viewers, whoever your higher power is, you cannot say I'm extending my age and not consult them. So there's the life expectancy. It's amazing. If you look at the life expectancy in this countries who are extending the retirement age, their life expectancy could be lower.
It's lower.
So
Right.
we need then to say, what are we saying to people? So, and then the second way we separate is separation due to circumstances. And this is the most frightening. When I got to the studio, we're talking about that. Many companies are calling me for counseling to employees who have separated due to circumstances. Circumstances. Now, look at the circumstances, retrenchment, retrenchment, artificial intelligence. There's a conference actually going on somewhere, I think next week or so, where they are talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs. So, in other words, it means people will be retired because of technology. It's a VUCA environment. The business models are changing. If you look at banks, there's so much retirement that has happened in banks. And so there are circumstances that can arise, sickness, death. All these are circumstances that can arise in your circumstances around you. The last way we'll separate is separation, which is what I teach. Separation, I call it retire on and with purpose. We are saying be purposeful. Why did I get into employment? What should I do? And when you serve purpose, it is time to retire when you've served purpose. And then you don't go and die. You actually also, you actually go with another purpose.
Yeah.
You say, I was a director. I was purposeful. I did my work. And when I retired, I'm here today serving another purpose. You know, some people I've repurposed. Some people actually will be like, why is this guy, he was a director, he used to speak about standards and things like that. But today I'm speaking retirement. So we don't really have to retire to wait to die and then we are no longer useful. We are useful until our purpose is done on earth. So we have a purpose to be on earth. When that purpose has been done, then we exit the earth. So that's the retirement.
I really like that, and it's something that I always battle. I always battle with. So I try and have this argument with my dad to say, well, you've experienced so many things. You've learned so many things along your journey. And in other countries, it's so common, we read Margaret Thatcher's books, we read former whatever directors' books in different countries. And it seems like we don't have a strong culture in Africa. But traditionally, African culture is built on storytelling, right? This is how we know mutupo wedu kuti anashava vakabva uku vazukuru vanyashanu, and it's passed down, right? The traditions, the values, the culture, the governance, how we did things as a people. It was storytelling, and I think we sort of need to not deviate from our culture, but say, okay, as we consider retirement, right? Repurposing all the years of experience you've had managing a business, owning a business, serving in whatever role you've served. How do you transition that? Like, how do you repurpose that for your family? All that knowledge. We talk about intellectual capital. One of the things we teach on quite a lot. We talk about it here on the podcast. All of that, right? We're sitting on masses of intellectual capital, so much experience, spiritual capital, social capital, that people just maybe they don't know how to understand the value of what they're sitting on. And so I really like what you're talking about repurposing and retiring on purpose. Maybe if you're a lawyer, looking at all the cases, things you've experienced, write about them, teach about them, do seminars. In other countries, people become lecturers. You're saying, well, I'm not active in this part, but I can still, my brain is still working. I've still got ideas. I've retired, but the energy, the experience, the knowledge, all the information I have, I can actually pass on to the next generation.
And Esther, you mentioned a very important point regarding what you've just said. 2 points come to mind here. The one is the concept of capital. When you started, you talked about the erosion of pensions. Now, when you look at that, then you need to say to yourself, in our context, where we have had probably currency fluctuations and pensions almost reduced, the experience and everything, the storytelling, what you have just been saying, is a form of capital. I actually teach people that don't look at money as only what they deposit as your salary. Your work, your life gives you experiences. The things you go through, the even painful experiences. Yes. Come to think about it, I talked about how I started my company. I started it from the pain, what happened to my father. Yes. Today, I'm living off it. I'm supporting soccer teams. I've started a tournament after my father. I'm supporting a lot of retirees. From that painful experience. So whatever we go through, let's not be so much celebrating it, not understanding that we need it to use it to work another person's life. Yes. You see, what you went through, when you talk to me, it works my own story. So, and that's been a key pillar of our families, of our culture. The other part that comes to mind is dying empty. Let's understand that there will be a separation from this earth. When that separation happens, all that we know, our knowledge, our skills, our attitude, our experience, let's find a youngster, another person the good, the bad, so that they learn and we become better. Continual improvement. When I was director, we used to talk about continual improvement, in the standards world. Our families need to continually improve. It is not good that whatever happens zvakaitika kuna sekuru ndo zvakaitika kune muzukuru until we start identifying ourselves kuti ndo zvinoitika mumhuri mavo zvakatomboitika kuna baba wake. If it's a good thing, then let's keep up the momentum. If it's a bad thing, let's learn from it, and we learn by documenting, by listening to these podcasts and taking those things and making sure we actually put them into practice. So very, very key.
I think for us, one of the biggest topics ever in family business really is succession planning. And when you really look at it, there's a lot of entrenchment with succession planning and retirement planning. We mentioned one of these statistics earlier that only 3% of African family businesses transition, right? Because there's no sort of forward thinking, there's no planning. And I know you've got very interesting views on how sometimes our culture can be sort of detrimental to the way that we think. Maybe let's unpack some of that.
Very good. So the most important thing, Esther, like I said, and I'm not trying to, your podcast is very, very at the center of how we can do well as a people, as a nation, as a families. So the word culture is key. The word culture is key. Because when you look at the definition of the word culture, it has various forms. Culture means the way we do things here. The way we do things here. So we need to actually stop and say, how do we deal with succession? How do we deal with retirement? Because there's a way. If you go to a company, there's a way things are done. It might not be written. I one of my work is I'm a consultant to some companies. You actually see that you need to see how things are done. If you don't understand it, nothing gets done. Some people shout, even in families. In families we have things. My daughter, I have 2 daughters. My daughter, if they want, maybe they're asking for some money or something, they know which daughter, when she comes to me, it's already authorized. It's just okay. So there are things, the way things are done. It's our culture. Now, the other dimension to culture is conditions necessary for growth. The word culture, that's why, and I use this because I'm a scientist. So in the science world, we say we are culturing. When we maybe we want to check whether there's bacteria, we put it in a thing there, and then we put things that will cause it, and we could to grow so that we can see, there's this type of bacteria, and we know the disease. So we need to understand that culture is conditions necessary for growth. So then we need to ask ourselves, how do we deal with succession? Do we have conditions that cause, growth in our families, growth in our family businesses? Are the conditions there? And one of the thing that is an eventuality for everything we do is that we'll separate. Remember, I go back, we'll separate.
And it's true.
Now, when we separate, we then need to say, how are we creating conditions for a succession? Actually, I've heard someone speak that there's no success without a successor. You see, there's no success. If what you are doing, even this podcast, Esther, it's also challenging you as well to say, we will succeed you. Because there will come a time when we need the work that I do. I'm being intentional. What my finance guy is my son.
Yes, I like it.
So when I met, and the guy, I'm training him. I'm taking him through. I go for a meeting. That's why I came with him to you, because I want to expose him. I'm emptying all that I know, my contacts, my network, where I get things wrong, where I actually acknowledge that, look, I didn't do well here, because I need him to learn and succeed me and become better. And linked to succession is the issue of legacy. What legacy do we leave? Once you don't have retirement and succession planning, then you cannot leave a legacy.
That's true.
And here is the problem, Esther. All of us, the word legacy is loosely translated as, what was your life all about? What did you move for humanity? Because everything we do in life, the cars, the houses we live in, all these things we live here, we are not going with with anything. And what remains is what we did, how much we helped humanity, what problems we solved, what we stood for. And through this podcast, challenging people, our viewers, our listeners, to say, when we are intentional about succession planning, then we begin to see our children not as competitors. It pains me when I look at families, brothers and sisters, neighbors. We are like competing.
Yes, that's true.
We need to create an environment where we teach each other and therefore succeed as a race. And it has become important, Esther, when we talk about this succession. Look at all countries right now. The United States, all countries, many, they are looking inward. So we need to understand that we are our own savior. And we need to do well as a people. We need to do well as families. To do well as a people, it means we are doing well as a family. Because the family is the first, sort of role model for what a nation becomes. So if we are not intentionally coaching our children, telling them that they will succeed us, that I'm not worried, I'm not frightened when I say to my son, like you saw, you need to do well. You didn't do well here. You need to watch this, the family business, the ins and outs. It's amazing how many children, how many spouses don't even know what the business that the other partner does. Suddenly, suddenly you are seeing people are coming up. Or even where they lose money. I was reading the other day, one lady whose husband passed on. They lost money because the friends, the business deals they were doing. Now, so we need to be intentional. And actually then provide that conditions for growth, conditions to be succeeded.
And I think, culture is why we with this podcast, we focus on being African, because all families exist in a context, right? There are certain things that make sense to us as a people, for example, extended family. It's maybe not so not such a big matter for sort of Eurocentric thinking, right? But for us as Africans, like you said, the intervention or the governance mechanism you used when you had challenges with your mom is you called Sekuru. Sekuru is he's an advocate. He's the adjudicator. Correct, that I cannot continue further with this discussion. So if I have challenges with my mom, I know that in terms of our construct, our society, we've actually got governance, a way that we make decisions, a way that we execute things. I'm going to find Sekuru. Or I'm having issues with my dad. I need an intervention. I'm going to find Tete, right? Because Tete, my dad is going to recognize her voice as his sister. She's got a political role. She's got a governance role within our family to say, when Tete comes, she's coming to adjudicate. She's coming to advocate. She's, you know what I mean? So in that way, we have a way that we manage our families. And some of these things, they're not negative. I actually think they're amazing.
Very important, Esther.
Amazing tools.
You're mentioning a very important word, context. Context. This is why we teach that no two retirements are the same. Understand your context. If you're the firstborn and someone is the lastborn, the way you retire is different. If you are third generation, like myself, I'm third generation Mozambican. My father came from Mozambique. The way I look at my retirement versus my grandfather, who was the first to come into this country, is different. So, and I wanted to pick on the word context because you mentioned a very important aspect of then retiring in the African context.
Yes.
Because we have such a rich provision, if only we could change and focus on it. Look, the average person, the African person, has got two homes. You have a home in town, and then you've got a rural home. And now, even with our government, particularly now, having given people farms and all that, when you understand that if you have a rural home, if you've got a farm, you have actually it's provision for retirement planning. But why I'm mentioning this, it's amazing how many people I meet whose retirement is all about, okay, if you tell them you need to, as you repurpose, you might then go to the rural areas, and if that is your context, and leave their house in town on a rental. I know, I'll be here. So understanding your context, African context and the buffer. You see, you mentioned how our culture helped us to deal with the retirement issue.
Yes.
My father went into forced retirement. If we had continued, you know what my mother told me? He said, "Munoita ngozi, muri vana," because we had pushed. No, mama, baba ngawagere pamba musikuti because we have 5 boys.
Yeah.
No, it is anana baba. And you know what my mother says? Yo, sit down. Yo, munoita ngozi. And we had to get a buffer. So it's important then to say, what is retirement in the African context?
Yeah.
What pillars? Support structure. Look, the way we support each other as families becomes a critical. You know, linked to this, Esther, I hope you are seeing something around that. Do we take you to an old people's home when you retire? You see, as a family, we are like, when I'm old.
I was given express instructions. If you guys don't want me, I'll die at my house.
Yes.
Because my mom is like, I'm not going to sit in any retirement home. It makes a lot of sense for us. And you know what I was saying to her? Okay, well, our grandmothers, because our culture, our society has evolved. I'm sure our parents were probably sort of maybe a lot of them first generation to live in town, right? And they left their parents in the villages. But that communal living, all your grandparents, the gogos, the sekurus, generally had all their neighbors. And then the neighbors, you've got this bigger, broader context of family. So they are never bored. They're taking care of someone's child. They are solving issues because they've been called in as they retired from maybe working in the fields and doing whatever.
Yes.
But because of the way our society was, Kumusha Koko in the village, they never bored. Your grandmother's not sitting. You go there, she's busy. Zungu zangu, pande mazukuru wangu, I'm going to a funeral, so and so is that. Oh, you say to my grandmother, you're always going to a funeral. Or she was going somewhere, so and so, I'm going there to help them solve their matters, or their children that are there. You're asking it, Vana Vani, no, so and so is reaping her tobacco, and then she asked me to take care of her children. So they've got this, they had a sense of purpose, they are busy. Whereas now it's changed. You know, with my mom, I said to her, what are you going to be doing? I'll put you in a retirement home. She says, never. I'll just stay in my house by myself, because now most of her children don't live in Zimbabwe. Society has changed. So I think, you know, the cultural context for retirement really becomes very important.
It becomes important. And you mentioned, you mentioned a key word, repurposing, where, if you look at the African setup, you would repurpose. One time you're hunting, you're doing whatever, in the fields, you're doing all that. But as you change your health, your what, you had another purpose. So you lived a fulfilled life. You see, I always tell people it's not just money that will cause happiness in retirement. You know, when I interview people in retirement and you ask them, what's really success in retirement? As much as money is one of them, but there are actually 7 things. They look at relationships, just having relationships. When I go, my mother is 75 now. When I go, I used to wonder, even when I would buy groceries, you find they've gone, the groceries have gone, and they're like, but what happened? She's giving other friends around, and you go home, they are together. And now I understand, say, okay, she's working on one pillar of retirement success, which is relationships. Waking up and having something to do.
Exactly.
When we have an event at the village, all that gives us, provision of our culture to deal with the retirement challenges. So very important to understand our context, build on our context, understanding the changes that are happening around that.
And I think one of the important things that so this is something that's become very topical, because I think we're coming into, which is generally across the world, your boomers are, they're into their retirement. So we've got succession planning, such a topical issue right now for family businesses globally, right? Whether in the UAE, whether in North America, whether in Africa, because you've got an entire generation of business owners that are coming into retirement, and then you've got our sort of generation, you millennials and so on and so forth, that are coming into taking over, and you've got very big generational differences. One of the things which is a phenomenon across the world, not just in Africa, is children that no longer live in the same space. We now live in a global world, right? I was actually reading an article about challenges with Chinese succession, because a lot of children went to America or went to London or went to, wherever, where they work somewhere else. and their families built businesses that are in the mainland, and you're now trying to get people to come back, but they've acclimatized into a different culture. And it's something I'm seeing, it's so common here, even with our parents. They grew up taking care of their parents. That was their context. They work in town. Gogo and Sekuru live at home. We send groceries. We go and see them. We are supporting them. And it was known. Your retirement plan was your children.
Exactly.
I'm sending you to school, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That was the common theme. But now our generation is like, our context is so different. We're like, why? I'm not working to take care of you. And you now have those conflicts of expectations, because one generation is, well, we took care of your grandparents when they were sick. We paid the bills and we bought them groceries. And then now you have your children that have lived in the past 15 years in New York or in Singapore or in the Cayman Islands, working in the bank. And you're saying to them, I expect you to take care of me, And you now have what we call intergenerational conflict, because the views, the perspective, the lenses are different, but also because that cultural context is now almost different.
And Esther, you mentioned very important word, intergenerational conflicts. Mm-hmm. I want to prove to you that the conflicts are real, even to our viewers. Mm-hmm. When you retire, I want to take the pillar of finance. Mm-hmm. What happens to your finance? Mm-hmm. As we talk even later on financial literacy. So when you retire, your money for living expenditure was coming before, when you were employed, was coming from your workplace, your salary. Yeah. When you retire, your salary stops. Mm-hmm. Your salary stops. Mm-hmm. But what does not stop, and what actually, if you're not careful, increases, is your living expenditure. Sure. So now the question is, where will my money come from in retirement? And this is an important topic for a lot of people. Where will my money come from? So some, and which I don't, I say it's not a reliable, just like I've just said. Children are not a reliable source of money in retirement. I mean, they've got their own complexities. They've got their own realities, and coupled with the higher unemployment levels now prevailing in some countries. So you only have 4 sources of income. Yeah. When you retire, you have 4 sources of income. And this is important because we need also to address the issue of financial literacy. Yeah. But let's talk about the 4 sources of income. So when you retire, your money will come from a pension fund, if you had a pension. So if you had a pension, but again, then you need to address issues of the erosion of pensions. Yes. I was reading an article, in fact, at the just ended Zimbabwe Association Pension Fund Summit, where they were saying the erosion might take centuries to recover from. Yeah. So we need to come alive to be alive. I'm appealing to all these guys listening to us that be alive to the fact that if you are banking on that, then okay, you need to reconfigure them. So there's a pension. The second source of funding is social security. So understanding all these issues around social security, how much is it, what will be required, how does it cover me in the case of an emergency, and all these things. So social security, another source. But again, understand the numbers there. The third one is savings, if you're saving money. Yeah. And then leads us to the financial literacy, because a lot of us actually say, no, I cannot save money because the money is not enough. Yeah. And perhaps seemingly so. You get a feeling that if I save, maybe there's an emergency in the family and I can't save. The last one is income generating projects. The last source is income generating projects, a business. This is why your podcast, your business you're doing is important, because it is actually a pillar in retirement, the family business. Because the family business has taken a dimension which is not just a nice to have. Yeah. It is actually a key retirement pillar, because it is a business, an income generating projects, or an investment. Yes. And if the family is not together, because the greatest threat to a family business is the family dynamics and understanding how we can. So I want you, even as you work on this, to realize that you are really working on retirement planning. I think
that's so true. That's so true. And you know what you're saying. One of I had a talk with the founder recently, and we were unpacking why they were sort of struggling or reluctant to leave the business, one of the key concerns is trust. I pay myself $10,000, and now my son is going to come and say to me, Daddy, why do you need all this money? Right? It was saying, well, I'm so used to taking care of myself. And if I leave the business, in other words, I'm no longer the CEO, I'm no longer managing the account, the flows, can these children, you're vulnerable. You're now saying, well, I'm at their mercy, right? They're giving me, whether it's even the dividend, you know what I mean? It's now like, well, I had my salaries, I had my perks, and I could tell my PA to do this. And I think part of it was that vulnerability to say, well, if I exit this thing, I've got a loss of control over my ability to actually get my own money. I'm no longer being asked what I do with money. Because now you're saying, well, you're 75, you don't pay school fees. You don't do this. You don't pay rent. You know, what do you need all this money for? And as children, we do it. And our parents are like, I'm an autonomous person. I'm an adult. And it's not I don't be asked, what do you do with money and things like that? And like you're saying that, families actually need to build that into their structures. Maybe even pooling some of their dividends into a retirement fund or a pension fund, right? To say, well, as we're putting our dividends, we're actually planning that in the next 20 years, as we're transitioning this generation out, we're going to have saved X amount of money from our dividends. That's going to, take care of families. And it starts to help people feel more comfortable and more in control and feel that they can actually trust the next generation is to say that I'm not and this coach said something like that.
Yes, I wondered why are they, it reminded me of the joke that is told about be nice to your children because they determine which old people's home you go to.
That's so true.
But talking about that, one root cause of that fear, all that conflict, which is inevitable. Why do you need so much money and all that? Is the issue of a retirement vision. It's amazing how many families, you talk to them and you say, what's your vision? Because the word vision is key, because in other areas, even for those from the Christian, they talk about where there's no vision, people perish. It's amazing how many families do not have a vision as a family. Because when you have a vision as a family, the word vision means singular sight. It means all of us seeing one picture. So we can then, the moment we have a vision as a family, a retirement vision, in our retirement vision, it will detail all these inevitable things, what will happen, the funding, the what, all this. So it's important for families to sit down, develop a family vision. It's important for businesses, for, every business. If you go to any company, they have our vision, our mission. We must inculcate the same thing in families. What is our vision? What are our values? Because linked to family dynamics is the issue of values. Because you go to some families, talking about family values and wealth. My mother, I'm remembering that lady. She taught me something which, up to now, it has given me security in my life. My mother, I would go, I went to a primary school. So we go there wasn't much in the house. So we go there, sometimes you've not eaten. When you come back, you're hungry. And they would make it good now. They've prepared eggs and bread. So my mother would put your plates. And then she's talking to the neighbor. I remember very well, so she's talking to the neighbor, and they'll be talking, and my mother made it a law. You were not supposed to take your food before she authorizes, before she says you can now eat. So are we talking of values, family dynamics, retirement? My mother would never, and I one time I even said, is this really my mother? Because she
You're
talks.
so hungry.
I'm hungry, and you know what they're doing? The story is like finished, and then another one starts, like our podcast.
Yes, exactly.
The family, the story goes, and you know what happens? So over the years, now that I'm older, I reflect and say, because now I have the value of not taking what patience and not taking what is not mine. If I'm not authorized, I could, even as a director, I could have misused company funds and so. Even in family businesses, you see, if we don't inculcate these values, then it will play out. So now, before if you put something and you've not authorized me, you may take this. I don't. It's because of that. So it becomes important to say, how do we instill our vision of retirement, our values, which will help us in retirement as a family? How do we train our children, ourselves, as we move along the journey to retirement?
And, like I said, the first time we spoke, we literally spoke for 2 hours because there's so much to unpack when it comes to retirement. And so we are definitely planning a part 2 of this episode, and it's going to be really exciting. We're going to convene a panel, and we're going to be looking at, different generational ideas. And we also want to, what we didn't touch on, is the next generation, our generation. How do you... Are we planning for retirement? Because we need to stop looking at it from an end perspective and say, where we are now, what steps are we taking? How would you repurpose your life? This is where you are for the next 15 years. But after 15 years, what do you want to see? And so there's still so much to talk about. But before we go, tell us some of your parting thoughts on retirement and the work that you're doing and the things that you're seeing, and maybe just parting advice that you could give our listeners and those that are watching us around retirement planning and having these conversations within our families.
So my parting shot is, to create wealth, family wealth, to defend family wealth, to pass on family wealth. And I repeat, to create family wealth, to defend it, to pass it on, you need a retirement plan. If you have your own business, if you have a family business, if you are employed, you need to spend a good time planning your retirement. Yeah. Do not be afraid of retirement. Have a retirement vision. Yeah. And, build support systems intentionally. Build support systems. Don't try and play out retirement at the end. Yes. Retirement is a game that you play during employment, during the subsistence of your business. So enjoy yourself, contribute. I always say, die empty. Make a difference and die empty.
I was going to say amen. I'm so used to church. I'm so used to church. Like, amen. Yeah.
So thank you so much.
And he left something that he's shared with me, a few times, is the retirement mindset, which is, I think, one of the things, begin with the end in mind.
Correct.
And so, I think our parting shot from all of this is, let's start the conversation in our families. Let's have the conversation with our parents. Let's have the conversation with our spouses. Let's have the conversation with ourselves. How are we planning? Are you going to be able to afford to pay for your children's university in 15 years? Right now we've got energy to run around looking for school fees and do a payment plan. But 15 years from now, do you still want to be doing that? Is this how you want to live your life? How do you see the end of your life? Beginning with the end in mind, what is the vision? And I think that's one of the things we share on one of our episodes, the 4 principles. And the first principle that we believe in here, that I learned, was we need to have a vision. Where are you going? Without a vision, the people perish. It becomes the compass. It becomes the guiding point. We're saying we're working towards this place that we're going. And so we hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Please continue to like, subscribe, and share. We are so thankful, so grateful for all the DMs that we're getting. We're getting questions on all our platforms, on TikTok, on Instagram, YouTube comments. We're really on X. We're really happy that we're making impact. Please feel free. This podcast is for families, and everyone is a part of a family, Feel free to ask us questions and even topics that you'd want us to tackle. Anything, even things that you feel that are controversial, that we're not seeing in our society, that you feel are important. Feel free to reach out. We've had quite a few topic suggestions from people, and we're going to be implementing them. And thank you so much for the support. Continue to like, subscribe, and share. If you're watching this, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, so that every time we have an update, you'll be in the loop. And until next time, keep it in the family and in the business.